My name is George Payne, and I'll be interviewing former Judge Kent Sandidge today, and it is May the 28th, 2014. So with that, let's start. Judge, in fact, I'll just call you Kent since
That's
I've known
fine.
you long enough to do that. You're unique in that you're a Nashville native, and there are fewer and fewer Nashville natives these days. Tell us a little something about where you grew up, and first of all, when you were born and where you grew up.
Born December 28 in 1929, and I grew up out in Madison. My parents, I was 6 months old when they moved out there. They lived on 16th Avenue, 17th, somewhere, and I've been told. And they built a house and moved to a subdivision near Madison called Montague. You may have heard of it. It's right on the river, the Cumberland River.
And it overlooks the river, is that right?
Well, our house didn't, but there were plenty of houses. We were one block off the river.
Okay, did your mom work or just your dad?
No, just Dad.
And what did he do?
He was with the phone company, Sue Bell Tel and Tel, Southern Bell Telephone and Telegraph.
And did he complete his career with them?
Yes. He worked for them for, it was 47 years, I think.
And where did you go to grammar school?
Grammar school, I went to Jerry Baxter to start with, a well-known name in Nashville, and then I transferred to J. Taylor Stratton, which was in Madison. Jerry Baxter was on Gallatin Road in Inglewood.
And did that include junior high, or did junior
Yes,
high?
it went to the 8th grade.
And then on to Madison? Where
No, to Isaac Litton. Madison High wasn't in existence at that time. This was, I entered high school in 1948. Litton was the high school, Isaac Litton was the high school out there.
And who was in your class, or that you is memorable or made a mark in Nashville,
In my,
or in high school with you?
in high school with me, made a mark in Nashville. Well, my graduating class in high school, there were, I think it was the most that ever went to Vanderbilt from Isaac Litton, from a graduating class. And we had 6 or 7. And right offhand, I don't think any of the names are known, but they all went to Vanderbilt, as did I, and graduated from there,
And
which was sort of a
did you-
record, I think, for Isaac Litton.
Did you play sports in high school?
I played at sports,
And which sports did you play at?
basketball. I was a substitute in my senior year only.
Isaac Litton was a sports powerhouse back
Yes.
in those days.
The team that we had in 1948, they had a new coach, Bob Cummins, who went on to coach as an assistant at Vanderbilt and elsewhere, and then came back into high school athletics. Bob Cummins made the football team at Isaac Litton a powerhouse in those days. The team of 1948 was the start of it, of his good teams at Isaac Litton.
And did you have siblings,
Yeah, 2.
brothers,
A
sisters?
sister and a younger brother. My sister was 2.5 years older.
Did they stay in Nashville also, like you?
No. Well, my sister ended up in Gallatin, and my brother ended up in the Navy after graduating from Vanderbilt, and then ended up in Washington, D.C. after he got out, retired from the Navy.
And why Vanderbilt?
I wasn't accepted anywhere else.
Did you apply anywhere else?
Yeah, I thought I would like Princeton, and I applied there after taking those exams you take in those days when you're leaving high school. But there was no letter coming from Princeton, but Vanderbilt said they'd accept me.
Were you a day student, or did you board there?
No, I
Vanderbilt.
went back and forth for the first year. In the second year, I boarded at the fraternity house.
And what fraternity were you in?
Sigma Nu.
And tell us a little something about Vanderbilt.
Well, it was first year was a lot of fun. I made good grades for some reason or other. I don't know why. But from that point on, I just made average grades until I got to law school. But
did that have something to do with joining the fraternity?
No, it was, that really wasn't what did it. I think it was that second year I lived in the fraternity house, and I think that did it.
So you fell among friends, and that was not a good thing.
That's right. But I did all right. I didn't flunk anything. My grades sank some.
What did you major in?
I majored in political science.
And who of your Vanderbilt years sticks out in your mind? Someone of interest or consequence or color?
Well, my best friend was my fraternity brother, Jack Swan, who went on to medical school at Vanderbilt.
Did he practice medicine here?
Well, yes. Let's say yes, he did. I thought for a moment that he had gone to Arizona for a year or two, but that didn't work out. So he ended up in practicing pediatrics in Nashville to start out with.
And did you go straight through Vanderbilt, or did you take any time off?
No, I ended up in the Navy, but I took my senior year in arts and science was as a senior in absentia in law, first year law, which counted as my fourth year for my BA degree.
So you did a collapsed undergrad law program.
Rather than 7 years for both undergraduate and law school, I did 6 years.
Why did you decide to do that, and what kind of pushed you into law? Was it the political science?
No. I had, my great-grandfather was a judge in Burkesville, Kentucky, which is south central Kentucky. Cumberland County, Kentucky is right on the Tennessee line, above Cookeville and Jamestown, that area up there. And he was a circuit judge for, a long time. He died, my great-grandfather died in about 1912, but I was not born, of course. But I don't know, that just interested me. And
did your father or someone tell you stories about your great-grandfather?
My grandfather did, yes.
And what kind of stories did he tell you about?
Well, my father also told me that he remembered as a child, his father, my grandfather, left Burkesville and moved to Nashville in about 1903 when my father was 6 years old. But I remember my father telling me that about times that even but prior to that, 5 and 6, that he'd go down to the courthouse and watch Granddad preside over trials. And that interested me too.
Where did your great-grandfather read law, or did he go to Cumberland?
He read law.
Okay. And practice in the town where he became...
In Burkesville, yes.
And
he was a circuit judge for several counties, but he lived in Burkesville, right near the courthouse.
And how long was he a judge, do you know?
20, 30 years. His name was John Henry Clay Sandidge. Anybody with Henry Clay has got to be a lawyer in Kentucky.
And so you just kind of assumed you'd always go into law. Is that right?
Well, no, I really didn't assume, but nobody had pushed me or anything. I just got interested in it. Sort of in high school, my interest started going that way.
Did you do debate or public speaking or anything like that?
A little bit in college.
And were there any professors in the political science department who inspired you or pushed you toward that?
There were two, Dr. Parks and Dr. D.F. Fleming. Dr. Fleming had made a name for himself in Nashville during World War II as being a radio commentator about what was going on in Europe. And I was influenced by them. I thought they were outstanding educators.
Give me the years you were at Vanderbilt to put that in context with World War II.
1952 to 54.
Okay.
And then a BA degree, and then I went away to the Navy.
Were there any people in your Vanderbilt classes that were World War II veterans? Did you see any?
Oh, there were a lot of them. I arrived in 1948, and just about every Red Sanders was still the football coach, his last year at Vanderbilt, and he had more ex-Marines from World War II in his offensive line and defensive line than you could shake a stick at. People like Dutch Cantrell and John North and others, et cetera, et cetera. And they were all war veterans, and they were tough. And they won ball games for Red Sanders.
So playing for Red Sanders was nothing in comparison to the Pacific campaign they had been through. So
a friend of mine, Jack Swan, was on the freshman team that year, and he tells a story about they had the freshmen working out over on one field, and what turned out to be a heck of a ball team, a football team working out elsewhere. And he said one day somebody blew a whistle and said, "Send the freshmen over." And they had a scrimmage. And Jack said he was lined up at defensive end, and they came with a play right straight at him, and there was a guy, he was running, and there was a guy lying right, had been blocked down and was lying on the ground right where he was going to step, so he did a sort of a half step and went over him. Coach Sandidge saw him do that and came over and said, "Son, when in your way, step on him."
I like that. Give them something to remember you
right.
by.
So that's the way it was in football for that year. Thereafter, the teams were okay, and then I really enjoyed the years at Vanderbilt.
Did the veteran students, did they talk about their experiences, or did they kind of stay to themselves? Did any join the fraternity?
Oh yeah, they were mixed in. Mm-hmm. And it was campus life for them, but I'm sure they had their own sessions that others weren't invited to.
Mm-hmm. Were they intimidating, or
no,
just interesting? And
just interesting.
Did that have? Why did you do the Navy after Vanderbilt, or did you do the 7-year program and then the Navy, or how did?
No, the Navy came after I got my BA degree, and then I had taken what's called the ROC program for reservists that were training every Tuesday night in Shelby Park at the Navy facility over there. I was one of those, a seaman recruit, I guess you'd say it. But I was going to college, and they had this reserve officer candidate program, which I joined. And then after you get your degree, and they trained you for several months, 1.5 months, one summer, and another 6 weeks, another summer, and then they gave you a commission.
Did they help pay for the school too? Or?
No.
So it's just working toward a commission.
It was, well, I was doing this to tell you the truth because Korea was coming on, and I was trying to avoid being drafted, to tell you the truth. So I joined the Navy Reserve, which was a dodge for a patriotic dodge, I guess.
Well, as one who attempted to avoid Vietnam unsuccessfully, I completely understand that.
And so I did that, but I had to pledge that I would serve 2 years in the Navy after I was commissioned, which I did.
So you then did 4 years at Vanderbilt, 2 years in the Navy,
yes,
and then 2 more years in law school.
Yes.
Okay, and what did you do in the Navy? When you were commissioned then in 56?
No, let's see, 1954.
Okay, 54.
Mm-hmm. And there I was, an ensign, which I'm sure you've been one of those yourself, I think. And they sent me to Combat Information School, CIC school in Glenview, Illinois for the first 5 months. I learned to, as they put it, gather, interpret, and disseminate radar information, on ship and fleet information coming in.
And how long was that program?
That was a 5-month program.
And then where did you go from there?
I went to a ship, the Northampton, a light cruiser.
Where was it?
It was at that time, its home port was Boston. That wasn't bad.
Did you meet it in Boston, or did you have to fly?
No, it was in Boston when I was transferred from CIC school.
And did you imagine you would spend the entire time on that ship? Or,
yes.
Okay.
And I did.
And did you stay in Boston the whole time, or did it?
No, The Northampton was brand new. I was, quote, a plank member, the original crew after it had been built and turned over to the Navy. And we were, for a long period of time, the whole time I was on it, we were checking out all of the equipment to make sure it was what the Pentagon wanted. And we had the manufacturer's representatives on the ship writing thing and doing the equipment and making sure it was working right, teaching the crew how to operate it and all of that. A lot of electronics was on the Northampton.
So it was newer than the
Yes,
World
it was
War.
designed to. As a matter of fact, it was designated at that time that if the president had to go to sea for any reason, the atomic scare was still up in there, that if he had to go to the sea, the Northampton would be where he would land because of its electronic communication systems were vast and extensive.
So after these shakedown cruises, did it ever go on a long-term cruise? Or?
Right after about a week after I came home in September '54, then about 2 years, it went to the Mediterranean and became the flagship of the CNC of the Med Fleet.
So you never got to go on cruise
No.
with it, other than there's the
I was on the
shakedown.
shakedown the whole time I was on it.
Are you in touch with any of the members of the crew or friends
I've
you had in the
remained
Navy?
in touch with my roommate. Sort of lost contact with him in the last 10 or so years.
This was
Hans Kramer, he was born in Germany, went to Dartmouth. He's a nice guy.
And where was he the last time you had any contact?
In Washington, D.C., practicing law.
Okay. So you came back to law school, and then you were one of these older, sea-hardened veterans in law school.
Starting my second year in law school.
And who is in your range of you that is now practicing in Nashville or did practice in Nashville?
Well, Bill Carpenter Jr., Mac Robinson. I wish you hadn't asked that question.
I should
There
have
was
given
only
you some more.
25 people in our class. I should be able to rattle them all off.
Were there any, if you think of some more, we'll go back to them.
Okay.
Any professors stick out in your mind?
Yeah, Dutch Hartman. You didn't.
I went to Ole Miss. to
Okay,
law school.
I knew that. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm not sorry, but I
Yeah.
shouldn't have asked you. You're doing the interview, not me.
Uh-huh.
And Dutch Hartman, Eddie Morgan. Can never forget Eddie Morgan. Evidence. You since you didn't go to Vanderbilt, you missed something of not taking with Eddie Morgan.
What stuck out with Eddie Morgan?
His vast knowledge of evidence.
Did he
rules.
have the knowledge, or was he just the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind in retrospect?
No, he had the knowledge.
Well, that was pretty esoteric, as I recall, back in the day. And did he practice law at all? Now professors seem to do consulting with.
No, not that I know of. He taught evidence at Harvard Law School until he was required to retire at 65, and then Vanderbilt soaked him up real quick. He didn't want to quit teaching, but he was through at Harvard. He's the one that was on board on the faculty in the Boston area when at Harvard when the Sacco-Vanzetti trials were conducted, which he has criticized ever since as being a total miscarriage of justice.
Well, I've read about the judge there was anything but impartial in that. I've heard these stories of Professor Hartman. When did you're married to Paula, right? Mm-hmm. And she's a doctor.
Yes.
What'd she specialize in?
Anesthesiology.
Okay. And when did you? We need to put her in context. When did you and Paula connect up?
Well, at the time I was my last years as a bachelor. Tom Shriver and I were in a flat together, sharing a flat. Tom Schreiber was dating Marilyn Gobert, and Marilyn had several roommates in the flat where she was living, one of whom was Paula Conaway from Macon. And Tommy was dating Marilyn, and they introduced me to Paula, and we started dating.
So that was when you were practicing law?
Yes.
Okay, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
but I wanted to make sure I could fold Paula in
Yeah.
when the time was appropriate.
Okay.
So in 56, is that right, you graduated?
Yes.
And had you focused on what you were going to do or where you were
No,
going to
I
practice?
didn't have the slightest idea what I was going to do when they handed me a degree.
So what happened after that?
Well, I studied for the bar
Yeah.
exam and got past that. And I got an offer from Manier, Crouch, White, and Harriet. Manier, Crouch, and White at that time. And I went with them.
Were they doing insurance law back then?
Yes.
Okay.
Hard ankle law, we called it.
That's funny. We just called it insurance law when I was getting in the game.
Uh-huh.
And how long were you with them?
8 years.
What kind of cases did you handle? Or
Casualty cases, automobile accidents, the defendant side, most of the time, all the time.
and was this in general sessions and circuit?
Both. And then in circuit courts elsewhere other than Davidson County, we would go to other counties and defend auto accident cases.
I recall from my insurance defense practice that people usually knew that was a deep pocket, so you would oftentimes get home cooked out in the country. Did you?
Yes.
Where do you remember going where you found?
Lawrenceburg.
Oh, law
Yeah.
west of the Pecos.
That's right. They had, the Freeman brothers, I think that was their name down there. They were a law firm, and they could work over an insurance company. You know, the juries, as you say, they would know that insurance was really going to pay the judgment that they were considering,
Mm-hmm.
and that their neighbor who was in the dock wasn't going to have to pay a nickel. So.
Well, did you? And it's probably easier to approach this way. Did you ever win a case in the country as an insurance defense lawyer?
One time, I think.
Okay.
But it was one we really should have. Even a jury, a country jury, knowing that, they still just had to find for us.
Did you ever go to the Court of Appeals on these?
No.
Okay.
The insurance companies, they looked at the bottom line on what it would cost,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd just take the cheap way out, the less expensive way, I should say, out. And so very seldom would you be able to convince the claims examiner in charge of the case back at the office, insurance company office, to go to appeal it.
In these 8 years that you were with Manier, who were the lawyers that stick out in your mind, or the judges who you enjoyed or didn't enjoy
At
practicing
Manier,
for?
Ed Herod
Mm-hmm.
was really he was really a nice person and really knew how to defend those cases, and he was always low key and just really did a nice job, and it was nice working with him and learning things.
Did you
the way
consider
he
him
did
a
it.
mentor?
Yeah.
Did they bring you along, or did they just throw you into the
It's
case?
sort of a little bit of both. They just threw you right in when you got there, and especially on general sessions cases.
Were the general sessions judges lawyers at that point?
Yes. Well, we had Brown Taylor. I guess you've heard a lot of stories about Brown Taylor.
Tell me a little something about Brown Taylor.
Well, he was
before my
he
time.
was be a character, and he would. All of the stories about him. At one time, he'd smoke a pipe. He'd sit up there in the chair before court was open, in the judge's chair, and he always wore I think it was a brown suit and
no robe.
no robe and no dry cleaning on the suit in a long time, as I can recall. But
Yeah.
he'd smoke that pipe, and then it'd come time at 9 o'clock to open court. He'd stand up and put the pipe in his pocket, you know, and so he'd open court and he'd sit down. And one time he was trying a case, and the pipe was still in his pocket, and all at once he right in the middle of the trial of this case, he jumped up, God, you know, said some expletive deletives, I'm on fire. It disrupted the whole courtroom till he could get that pipe out of his pocket.
I assume.
But it was always, you wouldn't know what was going to happen next with Brown Taylor.
Was he a lawyer, or was he like Andrew Doyle, a non-lawyer?
I don't recall. I think he had some sort of legal training.
As I recall, when I started, Andrew Doyle was the last of the, and I might have that wrong. Was he on the bench?
Yes, down in the city court.
Uh-huh.
Well, he was in the Navy, they call them Mustangs, I think.
He was. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I guess when they folded the courts together, he became a general sessions judge.
Yeah.
Is that?
If he was still there. He may not have been there when that happened. Because he was.
Well, he was a general sessions judge when I started in '73.
Well,
I think I had one case before him.
That's what they did then. They just folded it all together. When metropolitan government came in, I guess maybe a little even later than that.
Well, we're giving no warranties as to anything that either you or I say in this, so you're safe to speculate, and I won't judge that in any way. Any other general sessions judges you remember?
Judge Draper, before he went to criminal court.
I didn't realize. And how long was he a general sessions judge?
Oh, he was general sessions judge for a long time. His wife was a court reporter.
And did she do the reporting in his court?
Well, I don't think many cases in his court were taken down.
Sure, he was general sessions.
Yeah, but every now and then, if it looked like it was, you know, an insurance automobile accident type of thing that was already brewing over for circuit court, the insurance companies would pay to have it taken down to get testimony from people who were obviously going to be in circuit court. But
I recall he was slightly cantankerous back when I started on the criminal bench.
He was colorful.
Colorful.
Uh-huh.
Any other general sessions judges you remember?
No, although there were several more.
What about the circuit judges?
Well, there was Judge Langford was still there. He was in his last years as chief judge. He was because of seniority. And Bird Douglas. No, I think we only had three. Let me see if I can think of the third one. Oh, Roy Miles. Roy Miles, Bird Douglas, and Judge Langford were the three circuit judges when I started practicing law.
I found Roy Miles to be unfailingly polite. I mean, I enjoyed him, and he just had a few years. What was Bird Douglas like?
He was the same way. He was gentle and kind and low key.
And that's always a good thing if you're a young lawyer.
Yeah.
What about on the Chancery bench? Who was?
The Adams and Wade. Alf Adams and Bill Wade's father, the quarterback for Vanderbilt and then Chicago Bears. I can't think of Judge Wade, Chancellor Wade's first name.
It's Chancellor.
Uh-huh. They call
That's his first name, is Chancellor.
That makes him the head of Vanderbilt, I guess.
Yeah. What about, was Alf Adams, Judge Adams, was he whittling then?
Whittling and handing out gumdrops.
Tell me a little something about
well,
that.
I just heard. I never saw him do it, but he'd hand out gumdrops on the sidewalk to people, usually kids or something.
What about the whittling?
The whittling? I never heard about that.
Well, he would sit there while you would argue a case, and he would whittle under the bench. And at the end of the day, he would have this large stack of of shavings. I never saw the shavings, but I saw the whittling, and it was very distracting. As
Well,
you
there was
argued
a U.S. district judge that didn't whittle, but Judge Miller would take his morning mail out on the bench and it would be opened by a secretary, but he'd have it under the desk reading it while the trial was going on.
But before we get there, did you have any practice in federal court at that point?
No. Mr. White and I, Olin White, and I defended Kroger Company on a casualty case before Judge Miller in a district court. But that was the only case I remember that we had. That was obviously a diversity case.
Mm-hmm. And Olin White's son is still around. Tell me a little something about Mr. White.
Well, Mr. White was a short man, sort of squat and balded and balding, and was very proficient in casualty cases or any kind of other case. He was a good lawyer.
How big was the firm at that point?
There were 3 partners and 4 or 5 associates.
Who are the other associates?
Mike Robinson, Vince Fuqua. When I first came on, a guy named Dick Wright was there, but he was departing just about the time I got there. And I can't think of, well, it was Mike and Vince and I. We were just the only 3 at that time.
So this was about, I guess, 62 when you left, somewhere in there?
Let's see, I got there in 56. Yeah, it was somewhere in there that I went.
64.
Uh-huh.
Where'd you go from there?
See, was it 64? Is that what
Or
I had?
I was trying to.
Well, wherever it was, right in there somewhere. I left there, and Jim Neal was the U.S. attorney and hired me as an assistant U.S. attorney.
How did that come about?
Tom Shriver was an assistant U.S. attorney, and he knew I was leaving Manier, and Jim asked me to come in, and he had an open position. I've forgotten who had left, but there was an interview, and later on, a day or two later, he called me up and offered me the job.
And Jim Neal was your age or slightly older? Or
he was 1 year behind me in law school, and I think he was 1 year younger than I am.
And how did he get that position? Who was his connection for the U.S. attorney?
Are you kidding?
Who was it?
Bobby Kennedy?
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that was even above our senators.
John Sigenthal?
Okay, that was above the. Were they close even back then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I need to put it back in context. So that was okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
I was so shocked when you said,
well,
"How did Jim Neal get a job?"
Old age. Both of us can claim that.
Okay.
That disability.
Yeah.
And how many people were on his staff when you joined?
There were he and 5 others.
Who were they?
Well, Larry Moore Burton was there. Shriver, but he left soon to run for, I don't know whether Shriver had been in the legislature at that time or was running for it. He left there and went to Lackey, the other Lackey. Who was it? No, there was even
Joe, Mr. Lackey?
No, not them. He was in practice with McCardle. McCarley.
Okay.
It was that Lackey, and I can't, George or Jim or whatever, but they were cousins, I'm sure, but not the ones you've just named.
Okay.
And he was practiced with them for a while, and while running the legislature, and then later became elected to DA.
So.
But Shriver was there.
And who else?
Larry Moore Burton.
Okay.
Carlton Petway. Carol Kilgore, who was one of the best prosecutors I've ever seen. He was really good.
And he was one smart
Not
cookie.
to mention Jim Neal was pretty good.
Yeah. And how long were you with the U.S. Attorney's Office?
4 years.
And what kind of cases did you handle?
any of them. Well, I sound like a politician. We had
There wasn't any distinction between civil or criminal
no.
or tax?
Well,
or,
you had a little bit of both.
Yeah.
At that time, they had a bunch of cases where they were acquiring the land acquisition program for Percy Priest Lake, and I had supervision of those. But we had a secretary who was really good at that stuff, and very little I had to do. Just supervise her. She'd coordinate things with me, and all I'd do most of it sounds good to me because she'd been there years, acquiring doing all that land acquisition stuff.
Was it issues of compensation? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
that's it.
So
Just compensation, the Constitution.
It was just condemnation, then a decision on argument
Right.
over. And who were the judges at that point?
Miller and Gray.
Okay, so they were both on. Do you recall when we got the second district judge, or is that just back in the 30s? Or?
Well, there was prior to Miller, there was Elmer Davies.
That's right. Yeah.
And Judge Miller replaced him, and then I think it was after that happened that the second district court seat was created for this district, and Judge Gray was appointed to that.
And when was Gray on the bench when you were assistant U.S. attorney?
Yes, he had been there several years.
And who was his patron? How did he get on the bench?
Both Kefauver and Gore, who were these senators then, and they were Democrats in the White House. And he had been, as you probably know, was mayor of Franklin and practiced law in Franklin, and had been campaign manager for each one of those two senators. So I guess that gave you a leg up.
Plus he had the drugstore. His family had the drugstore down there.
His brother owned it.
Okay. Well, that's a trifecta if I've ever heard one.
Yeah.
And what was it like practicing before Miller and Gray?
Well, Judge Miller was quiet and calm, and then, but Judge Gray was. I like Judge Gray. As a matter of fact, I think he's probably the best trial judge I've ever seen operating in court. If you want to get to the truth, which a trial is all about, he could do it quicker than anybody. But he scared people to death the way he went about doing that. And
In what way?
He didn't put up with any nonsense of taking too much time between questions or not getting your witnesses to come into the courtroom right now, after the one's leaving. He didn't like any downtime, as some would call it, I guess. And he would, or shenanigans of piddling around. One thing he just could not stand was taking time on choosing a jury. Lawyers would get up there and come their turn, and they'd start into asking questions, and he would get irritated and stop it right now, Just wouldn't allow much time on asking whether a jury, about qualifications of a juror. He didn't think that was time well spent in a trial.
Well, give me your opinion. Now we probably over-vet juries. Do you think there's any real difference between the over-vetted jury and the under-vetted jury as you described? Or is it about the same in the long run?
I think you'd probably come out with a jury just about the same, to tell you the truth.
That's interesting. Talk a little bit about Judge Miller going through his morning mail in court.
Well, it was known fact that occasionally he would, you'd be examining a witness and he'd have his head down, and we knew that he was probably reading his morning mail, because just occasionally, an objection something would happen where he'd have to turn his attention on what was going on in court. But don't get me wrong, Judge Miller kept control of his courtroom, and
that was Alf Adams. I mean, he might be whittling, but he was locked into what was being said.
Yeah, but he would say, well, what's the question, you know, and then he'd rule. And it'd be right. He'd be up on what was going on enough to get tuned in real quick. But I'm not being critical, because
Oh, that's fact.
he was
Yeah.
he was intelligent enough to pull that off. The other one was Judge Gray. On the other hand, I don't know if you've heard the stories of where Judge Gray looked like he was asleep up there. He'd lean way back, and you could hardly see him when he'd get back. Just the top of his bald head would show out from the desk, and it would be tilted back, and you'd think he'd gone to sleep. And somebody would, one case, the lawyer quoted what a witness said 2 days before, and which brought the, quote, asleep Judge Gray up out of his chair real quick, and he said that's not what he said at all. And
He repeated verbatim what he said?
Well, the lawyer insisted that that's what he did say. Judge Gray had the court reporter to look it up, and Judge Gray was right. So
Not a good feeling if you're the lawyer.
No, and you just shouldn't contest that Judge Gray doesn't have his mind on the case back in those days.
During the 4 years you were there, are there any cases that stick out, or?
As in the U.S. Attorney's office? Well, Eve Hoover, I wasn't in on it, but that was Jim Neal versus Mr. Hooker Sr. And Eve Hoover, who had a truck line here, and he was charged with evading taxes. Big case, many 4 or 5 counts.
How long did it last?
It lasted until the opening statement by Jim Neal.
And what happened? He copped a plea?
Uh-huh.
Were you there to listen to it?
No, but I was in the office at the time, but I heard what happened.
Tell me what happened.
Well, Jim Neal got up there and made an opening statement of what he intended to prove, and he put what was going on at his trucking company. Eve Hoover also owned a big dairy farm down in Rutherford County, and where he lived, and sunk a lot of money into it. And what he was doing was taking the parts for his trucks, the list of parts he had to buy for them, and he was taking them, leaving the figures just right the same, and even the stock numbers the same, but he was changing it over to groceries, canned goods and stuff like that that would be used on his farm for his personal and consumption. Then he was putting that in as a deduction for himself on his personal income tax. And Jim was just putting the list of the parts for the truck on one screen, part of the screen, and the parts that he was deducting that had food, and it was just exactly the same except the names had been changed. The numbers were still all the same. The part numbers were the parts, and it was exactly the same, and he went through that, and Judge Mr. Hooker Sr. had had enough.
Did he say, "I'd like to take a recess"?
Uh-huh.
And do you recall?
And Judge Gray was the judge, and Judge Gray, I think, said, "I thought so," something like that. You know? And they went in, and they worked out a plea of guilty to half the counts or something like that.
Was that the only
as
time?
I recall.
Did you ever see
The
Mr.
case
Hooker
was over.
in action?
Mm-hmm. Beg your pardon?
Did you ever see Mr. Hooker in action in
Oh,
other
yeah.
cases?
Yes.
Where did you see him? Was that when you were in private practice, or?
Well, yeah, I
never
saw him
saw-
in action in private practice, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was quite impressive in the courtroom. Every time he would stand up would say anything, you could tell that a jury was paying close attention to him. And that was true of Jim Neal too. I don't know why, but those type lawyers, the juries always pay attention to him more closely than they do others. Well, I don't know if that's true, but they seem to.
I just remember, the Titans, and certainly Neal was a Titan, and Mr. Hooker was a Titan. Who were some of the others that?
Well, for the defense counsel, the Bolt, Hunt, Cummins, and Connors had Lindsey Davis. Lindsey Davis, when I came on, was a Titan for the defense bar. I remember he was really good, the way he conducted himself in his defenses. There was Mr. Denny, who was not a Titan, but just a very interesting defense
Who's
counsel.
that?
Dan Denny's father.
Denny.
Raymond Denny.
Okay,
Raymond Denny.
Raymond. Uh-huh.
Vaden Lackey was his son-in-law in practice with him. And Mr. Leftwich and Denny, or Denny and Leftwich was the name of the firm, I believe. And Mr. Denny was just a good defense lawyer for insurance companies.
Well, and everybody seemed to get together on motion days, I guess, to see and would visit the cases or the courts that.
The motion days were Friday in Circuit Court,
Uh-huh.
Davidson County.
If you heard one of the lawyers or two of the big lawyers were going up against each other, would you stay for that, or would you?
No, not.
Or you had to get back to the office?
Yeah,
right?
I would like to have. I don't recall staying for any.
Do you recall any other big cases when you were at the 4 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Well, there were certainly big ones. The Gary Etheridge bank robbery thing. This was later on when Gil Merritt was U.S. Attorney.
Did you serve under
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Gil too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Who tried that, or who?
Gil Merritt and Al Knight tried it, prosecuted it.
And tell me.
How you like that?
Yeah.
It's pretty tough.
Tell me about that.
Well, Gary Etheridge had a group of him and four of the guys were bank robbers, and they were the Gary Etheridge group, and they had robbed. I think the indictment against them was 4 or 5 indictments. They were each one a separate bank robbery, and then there was the indictment for killing a member of the Gary Etheridge group who had actually started talking to the FBI, and they killed him.
Allegedly killed him?
No,
or they killed him.
They killed him.
Okay.
One of his co-defendants was Eugene Beard, and I can't think of the name of the member of the gang that they murdered, but they did it on a lonely country road outside of Nashville, and they didn't quite kill him. He managed to crawl up to a farmhouse door late at night. There was light on the porch, and he knocked on the door, and the farmer and his wife came to the door, and he looked up at him, said, "Gene did it," and expired soon thereafter.
Dying declaration.
Mm-hmm. And it was an interesting case when all that came in.
What was the defense? I mean, it sounded like they were pretty dead to rights.
Yeah.
And what was the outcome of the it was
They were guilty. It was tried before Miller, and the outcome was they were all guilty. Some of them were just one of them was just a car driver on most of the cases, and he got off with 10 or 15 year sentence. Eugene Beard got way up there, 99 years somewhere. Judge Miller sentenced him he was convicted on the count with the death in it, and the others were sentenced to hefty. I don't remember right now, but they were a staggering number of years in jail, in prison.
Do you remember who defended them?
They had separate attorneys. Jack, I can't remember. He was an 11 attorney. Jack Lowry, I think.
Oh, he's.
Do you know him?
He's a very well-known attorney.
I was in court when Eugene Beard had testified. I don't know why he put Eugene Beard on the stand, but Al Knight had been given the duty of cross-examining Eugene Beard, and Eugene Beard had made various and sundry statements to various girlfriends and others, all during the history of the case, and they had all of that information from these people that he had made these statements to, and they were contradictory statements, and it was just a mishmash of what he had said outside of court, and he was up there trying to testify with all, and Al Knight had in his mind what each one of those statements were and who he'd said it to, and he took Gene Beard apart on cross-examination. I mean, literally just shredded him. Because he got so confused of what he said to who or what, and Al Knight wasn't confused about who he'd said these things to or what he'd said. And when he finally got off the stand, I was in the court. He walked back and was sitting down by Lowry, and I was just a few feet away on the front bench, and Lowry turned over to him, "You just convicted yourself," to Eugene Beard.
It was a 12-person jury.
Yeah.
Was it all male? Were women?
No, I think there were women on there.
Okay. Did women get a right to be excluded from juries if they wanted?
In federal court?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't remember anything like that.
Okay. I don't know.
I picked a few juries down there with women on it, and I don't remember that ever coming up.
After 4 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office, where'd you go then?
4 years that I went into private practice with Joe Lackey, a senior and junior.
And when you
Louis Farrell was there, Walter Harwood, me, and Alan Saturn was there. He was not in the firm or anything. He just in the same office he had an office there. Alan had a real estate practice.
Always had one. What building was Manier in? Was that the American Trust
American
building?
Trust, 4th floor.
And where was the Lackey firm?
Down there on the Parkway Towers.
Okay. And was Mr. Lackey in the firm?
Yes.
Joe's dad?
Mm-hmm.
And who else was in it? You named them.
Well, Louis Farrell.
Yeah.
Walter Harwood, Joe Jr., me, and Charles Alexander, his name was.
Was he from Franklin? Where was he?
No.
Okay.
He had been with the U.S. government, and I've forgotten what his position was with the government, but he was, as I had been, but it wasn't in the U.S. Attorney's Office. But I don't know where Charlie was with the government, but he was down practicing law.
And what kind of practice did you have there?
Just general practice. Mr. Lackey Sr., he just had a lot of older ladies who seemed to always show up and want him as a lawyer. But he did them well, whatever he's doing for them.
What about Louis Farrell? I know he was a good lawyer.
He was a Chancery Court lawyer, supreme. He really knew estate and estate planning.
And young Joe just took
general practice,
and
divorce and tort cases and contracts, anything that came in the door.
And any judges you remember there who stuck out? And how long were you with them?
With them?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see. I gotta figure this out. I went to was appointed. I'm gonna have to figure it out. Do you have it written down there?
Let me see.
Can you believe? 1972 is when I was appointed U.S. Magistrate.
I have U.S. Attorney 64 to 68.
Okay.
Assistant DA.
Yeah, well, that was part-time.
Oh, okay.
At the same time I was in with Lackey and Harwood.
And how many part-time DAs did they have back then?
I think I was the only one. Shriver was the DA, and He had me just as part-time.
And what kind of cases would you do as a part-time DA?
Anything they had that came up. I had a rape case. I had a rape case once that I prosecuted. That was an interesting thing, but.
And this shows you were the assistant DA until '72.
Yeah,
so
that's when I was appointed U.S. Magistrate.
And how did that come about?
Well, let me see how that happened. Judge Gray called me on the telephone, and he always sounds a little bit like he's mad at you when he's really trying to be friendly. And it was, like, Kent, can you come down here and see me? Very brisk.
And you're thinking, oh my God.
I said, certainly. When,
Yeah.
I'll be down there, if you can beam me up. But anyway, and so it was the next morning, and all night I said, what on earth have I done? But then I went down there and we sat down and chit-chatted, and he finally offered me the job. And I went, phew. So that's what it was,
Well, now, when was the U.S. Magistrate position created?
Right when right before Paul Jennings was appointed.
He was the first one?
First one, yeah. They had the U.S. Commissioner system.
Yeah.
A.B. Neo was part-time at that and practicing law at the same time. And then Congress came out with the Magistrate Judge Act. And that was I guess that was in '70.
So Paul
like
was
that.
the first, and
Paul was the
you were the
first.
second?
Yes. Paul was there 18 months. Got appointed soon after 1970 as the first one. Was there until September of '72 when I was to take office.
Is that when he was called in and told he was going to be the bankruptcy
referee?
Judge?
They were referees.
Yeah, I know,
then.
but
Yeah.
he just said he knew nothing about it. So you moved over and took his place.
We were both sworn in the same ceremony in the courtroom, same day, same time.
So that was '72.
Yes, September 1, I think.
And you remained a magistrate judge until you retired.
Till January 1, '95.
Okay, and at that time, '72, it was Judge Gray, and was Miller still there?
No, Judge Morton.
Okay, how long had he been on?
He had been judge, I know, at least a year, maybe a year and a half.
Had he had the busing?
Maybe longer than that. I really don't recall.
Had he had the busing case at that point?
Yes. Oh, yeah. That had been handed to him.
Yeah.
Which
was, I guess, the chief judge got to assign that to him. That was Judge Gray.
I think, yes, I don't know why he did that, other than maybe he's tired of fooling with it. I don't know.
Okay, and I've known they didn't particularly get along with each other.
After that, no.
Okay, and I've heard Marion Harrison was a law clerk to, I think, Judge Gray.
That's right.
And she ran afoul of Morton one time, and she always felt it was part of that tension between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
Did you work for both of the district judges?
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of cases were you doing back then?
Well, right at that time, the magistrates, we were U.S. magistrates then, the act hadn't been amended to read U.S. magistrate judge. Mm-hmm. And we were doing really just initial appearances on the criminal side and Social Security cases, and that was about it. We weren't doing very much.
And did you remember any cases of consequence or lawyers that appeared before you?
At that period of time? No, not particularly.
So no one was colorful, or?
No.
When did the second magistrate judge get over there?
That was Joe Haynes was the second chair for, by then it was U.S. Magistrate Judge. And my recollection, it was about 1988, 89, maybe not that late, 72, 85, 86, I guess.
And Joe did he go directly from the U.S. Attorney to the judgeship, or did
No, he was assistant district, he was from the State Attorney General's office. He was an assistant State Attorney General. And Joe made a name for himself of gathering up a lot of money for the state of Tennessee on the big class action lawsuit against tobaccos, people that was settled down in Mississippi. Tennessee he had handled that case for Tennessee, gotten in it, and reaped a lot of the money that was involved in that judgment, I understand.
Well, now,
You'll have to interview Joe on that one, but Joe Haynes.
Yeah, when did Joe Haynes come in?
But
Did he take your place?
no, he had second position.
Okay, so he took Joe's place?
No. Joe wasn't there. That Joe was U.S. Attorney at that time.
Oh,
I think.
okay, so he went from the magistrate position to the U.S. Attorney, and then came back. Is that?
No. Joe Haynes was in the State Attorney General's office, and he came to U.S. Magistrate Judge position from there.
Okay.
And then later on, as you know, he was appointed to the district court.
Yeah. When did you retire?
95, January 1, 95.
I can't believe it's been that long. But tell me about your family.
My family?
Mm-hmm.
Well, starting with
Your wife, Paula.
Paula. Paula was born in Macon, Georgia, and graduated from University of Georgia and then the Medical College of Georgia. Ended up and came to Nashville as an
a
intern.
resident or
intern resident at St. Thomas, the old St. Thomas, before the new one was built, and then she, the chief of anesthesiology at Vanderbilt, offered her a job as an assistant professor of anesthesiology at Vanderbilt. She took it and remained there until she retired.
And you have two sons.
Well, she retired from Vanderbilt, then went into a private practice type thing.
You have two sons.
Three sons.
Three sons. Any of them in Nashville?
And a daughter.
That's a lot of children.
As some would say, that I had, when I left this morning, I had just had 4, as I recall.
Yeah. Any of them going to law?
Not a one.
Medicine?
No.
Are they in Nashville?
Yeah.
How many of them?
The 3 sons in Nashville.
Grandchildren?
Yeah. My daughter has 2 daughters, and my son, my namesake, Kent Sandidge IV, has 3 sons.
Ooh. That's scary. I had 2 sons, and that was more than enough.
You're grandfather, aren't you?
Yeah, and they're a lot of fun, a lot more fun than dealing with lawyers.
Especially when they aren't in your house at night.
Yeah. So where's your daughter living?
She lives in Sweetwater, Tennessee.
Okay.
She's a school teacher in a school in the small town in Tennessee named Philadelphia. Have you ever been there?
I've heard of Philadelphia,
I've been to the other one, but yeah. Small town between Knoxville and Chattanooga.
What were your interests outside the courtroom, other than looking after 4 kids?
Paula did a good job on that, and I'll have to give her credit for looking after those kids mostly, and also practicing medicine at the same time. My interest, other than that, well, for active things. I was just sort of going through life doing water sports, water skiing. I did a lot of water skiing when I was young.
Did you? Well, you were living in Madison with access to the lakes out there, or
Well, this was after,
the
well,
river,
yeah,
the river.
we skied on the Cumberland River
Okay,
up there
yeah.
below Lock 2. I don't know if you may not have known that Lock 2 even existed. It was there at Montague on the Cumberland. And we skied in that area. There's a place called across the river called Wooddale. It was an interesting place to have picnics and things, and did a lot of water skiing there. Then
Did your
later
family
on,
have a boat up there?
yes,
Okay.
my father built a boat with an outboard engine on it, and
That
we
you
had
could
more
ski
fun with it.
behind.
Yeah, it was sort of crude, but yeah, we were able to pull it off, and then well, my real skiing came in later on. Well, not that far later on. I was still single, and we go to Lake Rock Island on the weekends, and have a good time up there. Willow Collins was in this group, and me and Willow and a whole bunch of people that go up to the Corneliuses they had a place up at Rock Island, and Willow's mother was a Cornelius, and so we'd hang out there a lot, and Lake Rock Island was a great place to ski because the water was always so smooth. The water skiing, just lovely skiing. And
Now, Willow Collins, that Ovid Collins?
yes, he's
Is that one
William
of the
Ovid
same?
Collins III. They call him Willow, his friends do.
And that was Ovid, the lawyer's
Yes,
son?
was his
Okay.
his father.
And Ovid was a great Nashville lawyer.
Oh yeah,
He always seemed to be very elegant and smart and
quiet and
quiet, and yeah, but he got some stuff done. I just remember
yeah,
he had a great reputation.
yeah.
What about whitewater rafting? You haven't mentioned that.
Well, that came on later. When first was skiing,
Uh-huh.
snow skiing.
Okay.
After water skiing was snow skiing. At the age of 50, I had never ever put a ski on. And a bunch of friends of mine, Dr. Swan and others, 2 or 3 of Dr. Furman and Dr. Allstat, they were all physicians. And we went out to Vail, Colorado one January, very cold up in the top of, at 8,000 feet in the Rocky Mountain, but I was a never ever, and so I took ski school lessons for 3 days and have enjoyed skiing ever since. That was a real experience starting at that very time.
Are you still doing it? I hesitate
No.
to ask. Good.
I quit about 4 years ago, I guess.
So when did whitewater rafting come in?
That came in, oh my goodness, George. Let's say, I don't think I'd been to the Ocoee where everybody here goes over there in East Tennessee. I believe the first time we went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and whitewater rafted the Snake River just south of Jackson Hole out to and from a point, I forget the name of it, but you rafted Snake River out to about the Idaho state line, and then take out there, and that was interesting. And I enjoyed that, and so I started going back out there every summer, maybe 2 or 3 times, and finding a good river in Idaho is really a good whitewater location. And I ended up in 1989 doing the Grand Canyon from 200 and something miles, 225 miles, from top to bottom.
That's the holy grail of whitewater rafting,
It's
isn't
tough.
it? Uh-huh.
The only tougher river that I have heard about is the Zambezi in Africa, where if you fall out, you will get gobbled up by a crocodile or something like that. Well, I haven't done that and don't intend to, but the Grand Canyon, you cannot believe I know the scenery from the rim is nice, but from the bottom up, the scenery is spectacular.
You have had a wonderful career and have a great reputation, and we've gone over a lot of what you did. What am I leaving out? What would be important to lawyers down the road or judges to hear about? I mean, that's a little bit of an unfair question, but
What should I say that will inspire people to?
or amuse them, or just entertain them.
Well, yeah, I've got a blank slate right here. Let me think. I guess just the old shoes of being prepared. You know, if that you're practicing law. Judge Gray, I think, taught that to anybody. You better be prepared in his courtroom, or you'll pay the price. And I think that's true of any good judge, that where the search for truth requires preparation and
the system,
acute
certainly.
skills at knowing how to handle things in court for your client.
And you've seen incredible changes in the federal system, an explosion of judges and positions,
And where Congress keeps meddling in the affairs of the third branch, such as the Speedy Trial Act and the Federal Speedy Trial Act for criminal cases, where everything has to be done on time or pay the price if the prosecution doesn't proceed on these landmarks as you go along that's set down by that statute. And then they came along and thought that worked so well, Congress stuck their nose into making civil cases go faster by having something similar to a Speedy Trial Act for civil cases. And that changed the magistrate's job from doing the cases I'd said where you do get some trials. Incidentally, the Magistrates Act was amended, and it kept giving more and more authority to the magistrate judges. And now, quite some time ago, I guess, way before I retired, they gave the magistrate judges authority to try civil jury trials if the parties consented to waive their right to have a district judge hear their case, which essentially would make the magistrate judge the district judge on that case. And I had a few of those, and they were interesting. But they continued to increase the use of magistrate judges, as they have for bankruptcy judges too, I think. And my advice is to use a magistrate judge for your civil case. You'll get a quicker trial, I think, down there in federal court. Just consent and waive your right to a district judge presiding over your civil case and get a quicker trial. The magistrate judges know how to do it.
and
It's
they're
not that difficult to do it.
and they're great magistrate judges, and
Oh,
we've
yeah.
always had a tradition of great bankruptcy judges
Right.
and magistrate judges, as you
Yeah.
know. So we've been lucky. Well, I really appreciate your doing this today, and I wish you well on your continued retirement.
Thank you very much.